Welcome to Criminology CRM 360. In this section, we shall be studying learning theories of crime. Learning theories, along with strain theory and self-control theory, forms the big three schools of criminological theories. In this chapter, we will examine learning theories of crime and some other important associated research. Sykes and Matza's theory of neutralization was like Sutherland's theory in asserting that criminal behavior is learned. Sutherland had argued that learning of crime involved learning of definitions of motives, drives, rationalization, and attitudes favorable to violation of law. However, Sutherland had not explained each of the various definitions in detail. Like Sutherland, Sykes and Matza also believed that criminal behavior is learned, especially through the process of social interaction. Unlike Sutherland, who focused on the process of learning, Sykes and Matza focuses on what is learned. They argue that delinquents generally do not approve of the acts of delinquency. They engage in delinquency after neutralizing their concerns about the wrongness of the delinquent's acts through employing techniques of neutralization. The techniques of neutralization are used to negate their belief in the wrongfulness of the delinquent acts. Scholars such as Albert Cohen had posited that the delinquent subculture was one which was in opposition to the dominant middle class values of respecting and abiding by the law. Sykes and Matza argue if that was the case, then criminals should not show any feeling of guilt or shame. They said that this was not what was seen in reality, as most delinquents experience guilt and shame. It is seen that most juvenile delinquents admire and respect law-abiding citizens. In addition, they resent illegal behavior of significant others in their immediate social environment or by their heroes. The juvenile delinquent also draws a line between those who can be victimized and those who cannot. Some people are viewed as fair game and they don't steal from friends or don't vandalize churches. These characteristics indicate that the wrongfulness of delinquent behavior is recognized by the delinquent and there is an internal demand for conformity. The delinquent lives a life that is embedded in the larger world. He is usually socialized by parents and a family that is at least partially, if not fully, committed to the dominant social order. Therefore, the delinquent cannot be fully immune from the demands of conformity of the dominant social order and is at least partially committed to it. This results in the person exhibiting guilt and shame in his behavior when he violates the dominant social norms, which is a result of the external social demand for conformity. There is a need, therefore, to understand why a person violates the law despite the internal and external demands for conformity with the social norms. Sykes and Matza addresses this by understanding how these demands for conformity are neutralized by the delinquent, which allows him to commit his illegal acts. Sykes and Matza states that the law provides for legally acceptable defense against crime such as insanity, consent, and compulsion. Delinquents use legally unrecognized extensions of defense of crime which acts as justification for committing an illegal act. These justifications are achieved through a process of rationalization. The rationalization neutralizes the personal disapproval coming from the internalized norms and those coming from the conforming significant others in society. The rationalization is done prior to the commission of a criminal act. The rationalization protects the juvenile from self-blame and damaging self-image. The theory asserts that crimes are committed more by learning these rationalization techniques than by learning values or attitudes that contradict the dominant social norms. Sykes and Matza identifies 5 different neutralization techniques. The first was the denial of responsibility, in which the delinquent convinces himself that he lacks responsibility for his deviant actions. He blames it on other causes which reduce his internal disapproval of self and mitigates the disapproval of others. The delinquent absolves self of responsibilities by asserting that the acts are due to forces outside his control, such as unloving parents, bad friends, and poor neighborhood. The person sees himself as being forced into a situation. This method deflects blame from the violation of social norms from self. The deviant thus prepares the way for deviance from the norms of society without the need for an assault on the norms themselves. Of neutralization is the denial of injury. The delinquent, through his rationalization, diminishes the gravity of his act. The person may rationalize that no other person or society itself has been hurt by his action. Harm caused by an act is interpreted differently. For example, vandalism is interpreted as mischief, auto theft as borrowing, gang fights as a private quarrel or duel between willing parties, and not of concern for the community. The person tries to reduce his legal acts as just fun or pranks. The delinquent rationalizes that his acts does not cause any harm despite the fact that it violates the law. He breaks the link between his act and its consequences by denying injury or harm. These acts neutralize social control without completely opposing social norms. The third technique used is the denial of the victim. Another method of neutralization adopted by juveniles is that they deny the victimhood of the person impacted by the crime. It is claimed that the injury is deserving as a form of punishment or retaliation. Through this rationalization, the victim is turned into the wrongdoer. Such forms of rationalization is used in crimes against gays, minorities, vandalization, revenge against unfair teachers or school officials, shoplifting from stores of so-called crooked store owners. Denying the existence of the victim by transforming the person into one who deserves the injury is a process of rationalizing a crime. Diminishing the victim aids in neutralizing the internalized norms and reactions of self and others. The fourth technique of neutralization is by condemning the condemner, which would mean that the delinquent would attack the motives and intentions of the behavior of those who disapprove of his violations. The delinquent shifts the focus of attention from his own deviant acts to the motives and behaviors of those who disapprove of his violations. The deviant portrays his condemners as hypocrites, deviants, or being motivated by a personal spite. Police are called corrupt and brutal, teachers show favoritism, and parents take it out on their children. The delinquent deflects the negative sanctions consequent to a deviant act and changes the subject away from his own deviant behavior to the reaction of others. In this manner of diverting attention away from the delinquent, the wrongfulness of his behavior is suppressed and removed from focus. The fifth technique of neutralization entails sacrificing the demands of the social norms of larger society for the demands of the smaller group to which the delinquent belongs. These groups may be gangs, racial or ethnic groups, cults, etc. The delinquent may not reject the norms of society but portrays himself as in a dilemma, a conflict between the loyalty of the person's parochial group and the larger social norms. Society's norms are not rejected, but other norms involving higher loyalties are accorded precedence. The definition of the situation by the delinquent, while not directly opposing the larger social order, undermines the larger social order and its norms. To sum up, techniques of neutralization may not on its own be able to completely negate the influence of a person's internalized values and influence of significant others in society. However, they do have an important role in reducing the impact of forces of social control on a juvenile. Akers' social learning theory extends Sutherland's differential association theory, building on Sutherland's foundations that people learn crime by being exposed to and adopting definitions favorable to crime. Akers focused on how crime is learned by using theories of learning. Sutherland's theory argued that criminal behavior is learned in interactions but does not specify the mechanism by which such behavior is learned. Akers draws on theories of learning such as behavioral theory and social learning theory of psychology and explains how crime is learned. Akers also uses Sykes and Matza's techniques of neutralization. Social learning theory is therefore a broader theory than Sutherland's differential association theory and integrates concepts of differential association theory with differential reinforcement and other learning theories. The learning theories include concepts of operant behavior, of being conditioned by rewards and punishments, respondent conditioning of involuntary reflex behavior, discriminative stimuli on cues or signals of behavior, elements of symbolic interactionism, which posits that social interaction is mainly exchange of meanings and symbols. The basic assumption of social learning theory is that the same learning process in the context of social structure, interactions, and situations produce both deviant and conforming behavior. The difference is caused by the direction of the balance of influences, whether conforming or deviant on the individual. The balance is determined by differential association with criminals or conforming individuals, definitions of whether it is desirable or not, and anticipation of future rewards and punishments. Akers relies on the four principles of differential association, definitions, differential reinforcement, and imitation to explain the learning process. Differential association is the process by which a person is exposed to definitions encouraging deviant or conformative behavior. The process has both an interactional and normative dimensions. The interactional dimension is the association and exchange with others who engage in a certain kind of behavior. The normative dimension is the process and the values a person is exposed through the association. The groups through which a person is in differential association provides the social context in which the social learning occurs. The group exposes the person to definitions, models to imitate, and differential reinforcement of source, schedule, value, and amount for criminal or conforming behavior. The groups are primary groups of family and friends and secondary groups of neighbors, church, school, and law and authority figures. They have varying impact on an individual's propensity to criminal or conforming behavior. The association that occurs earlier, reflecting priority, lasts longer, reflecting duration, takes place more often, reflecting frequency, and involves others with whom one has closer relationship, in reflecting intensity, have the greatest impact on behavior. It is evident that, like Sutherland, Akers placed a high level of importance to the process of how an individual associates with others and learns favorable and unfavorable values through the association. Definitions are the meaning a person attaches to a given behavior. It could be seen as right or wrong, desirable or undesirable, just or unjust. Definitions determine whether a person approves of an act or not. The greater the extent to which one has attitudes that disapprove of an act, the less one is likely to engage in it. Conversely, the more one approves of a behavior, the greater the chances of doing it. Definitions approving of criminal acts are positive definitions and neutralizing definitions. Positive definitions are beliefs that make a behavior desirable and permissible. Neutralizing definitions are favor the commission of a crime by justifying it or excusing such behavior. Definitions favorable and unfavorable to a criminal behavior are developed through the differential reinforcement and imitation. Some of these definitions are so intense that it could compel a person to violate the law, such as a person with radical ideologies engaging in a terrorist act, or a person with political or religious ideologies engaging in civil disobedience or pursuing extreme religious practices such as human sacrifice or female circumcision. However, most of the definitions favoring crime are of moderate intensity, which facilitate commission of a crime in favorable circumstances. Differential reinforcement refers to the balance of rewards and punishments that follow a particular behavior. The possibility of a behavior being repeated increases when there is a positive reinforcement, which would mean that a person is rewarded for the behavior. On the other hand, the chances of desistance from a behavior increases when there is a negative reinforcement, which is followed by punishment or unpleasant consequences. There are different dimensions of a reinforcement, whether positive or negative. These dimensions include the amount, the frequency, and the probability of the reinforcement. The greater the amount of reward or punishment and the frequency of reinforcement, the higher the chances that the person will indulge in the behavior. The higher the chances of the reward or punishment, higher will be the chances of the behavior that the behavior will be repeated. For example, the higher the chance that a person can make a successful drug deal on the streets, and the more likely he will indulge in illegal sales of drugs. Similarly, the higher the chance that he would be caught for a drug dealing by the police, the greater the chance that he would desist from such behavior. The first being an example of positive reinforcement, and the second an example of negative reinforcement. The process of reinforcement mostly occurs in the form of social exchanges of words, uh, behavior of other person, and social rewards. The rewards would be appreciation or admiration by people indulging in similar criminal behavior, or the gang. Respectful behavior by other criminals on the street, and the possibility of rising in the hierarchy of the gang. Rewards also in the form of tangible outcomes of more money and material positions. Even these material rewards translate into prestige and approval in society. Imitation refers to the copying of behavior after observing of such behavior in others. Whether a behavior would be imitated would depend on the characteristics of the person being copied and how desirable he is to the new entrant. For example, a seasoned and successful gang leader in the neighborhood who has a reputation for toughness, is influential, and rich will be copied by the new members in the gang. The behaviors copied would include mannerisms, speaking style, and modus operandi of crimes committed. Similarly, a law-abiding person in a neighborhood who keeps a regular job and scrupulously obeys the law and is respected by all will be imitated by the young as a role model for achieving success in life. Uh, Imitation is of great importance in the initial shaping of the behavior of a young person, and to some extent of maintaining the behavior over the life course. Akers' social learning theory states that the four variables of differential association, definitions, imitations, and differential reinforcement form the basis for an individual to learn crime. He asserts that differential association with persons with criminal background precedes the starting of criminal behavior by an individual more often than the sequence in which delinquency precedes deviant association. In addition, learned definitions, imitation, and differential reinforcement produces delinquent acts. While the influence of each variable continues along a criminal career, the importance of imitation becomes less with repetition of criminal acts. An individual's progression into a criminal career could be offset through formal and informal sanctions received by him discouraging criminal activities. Aker therefore proposed a temporal sequence by which persons came into and continued in engaging with deviant acts. This slide is a summary of the key concepts of Akers' social learning theory. It gives an overview of what differential association is, the interactional and normative aspects of differential association, what are the definitions favorable to commission of act or desisting from it, how individuals engage in behavior imitating others, and the concepts of differential reinforcement, which involves balancing anticipated rewards and punishments. Akers' social learning theory combines Sutherland's differential association and behavioral learning principles. The theory proposes that criminal behavior is learned, repeated, and changed by the same process as conforming behavior. Akers' theory has focused on differential association, definitions, differential reinforcement, and imitation. When an individual differentially associates with those with deviant behavior, the person has definitions favorable to commission of crime, are exposed to deviant acts, and deviant behavior is differentially reinforced, then the process will more likely produce deviant behavior in the individual. The social learning theory has been strongly supported by empirical research. Akers had also proposed a social structure and social learning model in which he took into account the impact of social structural factors on the individual's conduct. Social structural factors affect the social learning variables of differential association, differential reinforcement, definition, and imitation, which in turn have an impact on the individual's conduct. Social learning variables are the primary proximate cause of criminal behavior. Social learning variables mediate the relationship between the social structure and the criminal behavior. In this model, Akers is pointing to the fact that social structural factors which an individual was exposed to had an impact on the type of individual or groups an individual was exposed to. The definitions supportive of or against criminal behavior, role models for imitation, and the possibility of getting rewards or punishments for a criminal act. The relationship between social structure and social learning had an impact on the individual's behavior and whether a person would adopt criminal or conforming behavior. Akers identified 4 dimensions of the social structure which had an impact on the 4 social learning variables. The first dimension of social structure Akers identified was the differential social organization. It refers to the structural variable that correlates with crimes such as age structure of the community, population density, ethnic composition, and gender ratio. These are variables that could make the area more prone to have higher crime rates. For example, an area with more younger people would have a population more prone to indulge in crime due to the relationship between age and crime. This could give an individual more opportunities for associating with others, indulging in crime, and getting influenced and committing crime himself. Similarly, an area with larger number of single-parent homes would also have higher crime rates, which could affect the possibility of individuals taking up a life in crime. The second dimension of social structure is the differential location in the social structure. This refers to the social demographic characteristics of the individual and the social group within the larger social structure. These variables could include class, ethnic group, and gender. A person belonging to the lower social class could suffer from social wants and strains and could have lesser opportunities to earn livelihood through legal means. This could result in the individual being attracted towards criminal groups and learning value definitions favorable to crime. Similarly, ethnic groups that are disadvantaged in society would have difficulties in entering the mainstream of the labor market, resulting in youth adopting deviant means to achieve money and social status. Dimension of social structure identified by Akers is the theoretically defined structural variables such as anomy, social disorganization, group conflict, and patriarchy. These dimensions have been held and been discussed in detail in different chronological theories. The impact of normlessness or a state of anomy on adoption of crime by the individuals have been addressed by Robert Merton's anomy and strain theory. Chicago School has explained in detail the impact of social disorganization and the impact of social cohesion and social capital, which has been examined by Sampson and Rodenbush. And the impact of patriarchy on crime has been addressed by feminist theorists. The differential social location refers to the relationship within the social groups such as family, peer group, work groups, religious groups, and schools. The quality of the relationship with such groups provide a context for what they learn and whether they imbibe values to conform with social norms or learn deviant norms. The structure has an impact on a person through how it determines a person's exposure to criminal associations, provide role models to imitate, learn definitions favorable to crime, and adopt criminal behavior. The differential social organization of community and the differential social location of a person in the community provides the general learning context for the individual and increases or decreases the likelihood of their committing a crime. The differential social location provides the immediate context that promotes or discourages criminal conduct. There are therefore external factors in society which could determine whether a young person adopts a life of crime or conforms to social norms. This slide is a graphic summary and representation of Akers' social structure and social learning model in which he integrates social structural variables and its impact on social learning and the final impact on individual behavior. Of the social structural variables considered, he takes into consideration the differential social organization, differential location in the social structure, theoretically defined structural variables, and the differential social location in the groups. These social structural variables have an impact on social learning process through differential association, differential reinforcement, imitation, and definition of social situations and behavior. Depending on how much the social value learning support conforming behavior or deviance from it, an individual would adopt a life conforming to social norms or a life of crime. Some groups in society have norms, values, attitudes, and material traits that are different from the larger society and are conducive to crime. As they have a value system conducive to crime, they have a higher rate of crime, and the subgroup with different values form a subculture in the larger society. Wolfgang and Ferracuti had theorized the characteristics of a subculture of violence. They have stated that in these subcultures, violence permeates the values of the subculture and impacts the lifestyle, socialization process, and interpersonal relationship of the people. Elia Anderson, in his book The Code of the Streets, has given an ethnographic description of life in such subcultures in the African American community in the inner cities of the United States. Wolfgang and Ferracuti identified certain characteristics of the subculture of violence. Firstly, they stated that the subculture cannot be in total conflict with the larger society in which it is present. There are common values present in the subculture and the larger society which acts as interlocking values. This would mean values such as pursuit of social status through education and work, pursuit of wealth, and respect for legal behavior. Therefore, it is seen that the subculture cannot be totally different and in complete conflict with the larger society. Another aspect that is noticed is that violence occurs even in the larger society, as this violence may be legitimized through laws or social norms and also may be of a lower intensity compared to the violence occurring in the subculture. A second characteristic noted by Wolfgang and Ferracuti was that the individuals in the subculture need not use violence in all situations. The normative system prevalent in the subculture would require that violence and aggressive behavior is required as a response in certain situations. These situations may include disrespect shown to a person on the street, or insult to a family member or a woman associated with a male individual, which could call for a violent response. However, this does not mean that people engage in violence continuously, as it would make normal social functioning impossible. What is suggested is that while violence is a ready response that could be used at a short notice, its frequency cannot be so high that it would result in anarchy and collapse of society. Gang and Ferracuti state that in such subcultures, violence and the willingness to use violence has a permeating presence and is a dominant character of day-to-day discourse. The dominance is reflected in the number of such incidents and situations. Compared to the larger society, the number of violent incidents taking place in a subculture is higher, and as far as the variety of incidents, it could range from minor assaults to fatal crimes. Another characteristic identified was that the ethos of violence was mostly localized in the age group from late adolescence to middle age. This is in keeping with the relationship between age and crime, which has been established empirically. The authors state that while the subculture would in general have the ethos of violence, there are small groups within the population of the subculture where people are more involved in violence. The fifth characteristic identified is that there's a lack of tolerance of people who don't meet up to the required level of violence. Individuals who don't react to the perceived disrespect or violation of honor or fail to protect any insult of their women companions are considered as cowards and may face ostracization of different forms. Ostracization may range from expulsion from the subculture to being forced to move out of the area due to violent punishments. The authors take a position that favorable attitude towards use of violence and aggression is a learned response facilitated through social interactions and are integrated as a habit in a more or less permanent form as a personality characteristic of the person. They state that the process of learning involves both differential association and differential learning. They underline the possibility that all persons exposed to such learning absorb and share the values equally. It is possible that certain people have a personality trait and are psychologically more susceptible to learning aggressive behavior and using it. Such a subculture is informed of violence as there are frequent incidents in society. People use violence against each other as they have the same values and norms. Violence therefore becomes a part of the lifestyle. Retaliation to violent acts is also viewed as a legitimate response. People indulging in violence therefore are not burdened by guilt. This is also because the victims of a violent act are people who belong to the same subculture. To sum up, some theories have supported the idea of the subculture of violence and argued that members of lower social class emphasize values of toughness, honor, and revenge. This results in frequent incidents of violence in this part of society, and there are also theories arguing that people in southern United States hold values conducive to lethal violence, which explains the higher homicide rates in the South. Though there is not much empirical research supporting macro-level learning theories, there are ethnographic studies that support the thesis that though there is a universal condemnation of violence and crime across society, there are differences in degree to which crime and violence is condemned. This may result in certain groups, especially the marginalized ethnic communities and classes, where there may be lesser degree of condemnation of violence. This difference with the larger society may result in higher crime rates and perception of existence of a subculture of violence. There is a need for using more quantitative and qualitative methods to do empirical research to substantiate these theories. However, it must be appreciated that the subculture of violence approach has the advantage of bringing together sociological and psychological constructs to explain the concentration of violence in specific socio-economic groups and geographies in society.